So now you want to set up your own supply chain. There are some things you need to consider. What extent of integration will you have? What are going to be the logistics? What level of technology will you use? And how do you choose who is going to be your supplier in your supply chain? So let's start with the extent of integration. To talk about integration, we're talking about ownership. So vertical integration looks at whether or not you own the factory or you own the retailer. So are you going to take parts of your supply chain and take over or own some of those companies, more than one company in the supply chain? So for example, if we look at Hyundai, Hyundai owns the steel factories in Korea. So why would they do this? Why would they own the steel factory? Well, if you own the steel factory, then you're going to get the cheapest rates when it comes to steel, as well as you can set the specifications for quality and for production. So there's cost savings for them to be both the factory and the retailer and other parts of the supply chain. So why might you want to own multiple parts of the supply chain? Well, if you own multiple parts of the supply chain, then you should have less of a bullwhip effect because there's communication sharing within your own company, and so there's not uncertainty in terms of how much orders there's going to be since it's all the same company. It should be more efficient, and you should be able to share proprietary information. One of the challenges with the supply chain is that the companies in your supply chain that are not your company, you have to decide what level of information sharing you're going to do. And we'll look at information sharing in just a moment. Why might you not want to own part of the supply chain? Well, if you don't have that expertise, then it makes more sense to outsource to a different company than to try to have expertise in everything within your own company. So sometimes you don't want to own parts of your supply chain. Companies that have done vertical integration, so they do own parts of their supply chain, would be Campbell Soup. They've doubled their inventory turnover rate because of it. Hewlett-Packard cut their supply costs by 70%. And because of vertical integration, Walmart is the largest and most profitable retailer in the world. If you don't have vertical integration, then you need some kind of partnership or relationship with the members of your supply chain. So in this case, you're going to have to make some decisions as to what kind of information sharing you're going to do. Okay, so how much information sharing, what kind of information is going to be shared. So you could share information in terms of the number of customers, what you're expecting to see in terms of demand to help reduce the bullwhip effect. If you identify issues in production or issues with customers in terms of what they're looking for, you communicate that. So it can be used for early problem detection and to create faster response. So if we're simply just talking with our supplier more frequently about what we're seeing, then in this case, this is the lowest level of information sharing, and it's simply to improve the trust and the confidence within the parts of our supply chain and get a faster response. Okay. Now we can increase the level of information sharing by coordinating workflow, production, operations, and procurement. So here we can get even faster response and more production efficiency, where we start to share much more information, and likely we're going to use ERP, which is Enterprise Requirement Planning. This is software. Oops. Come on. This is software that multiple parts of the supply chain can log into, and it then shows that information. One form of this software that takes it to the next level is the idea of EDI, which is electronic data interchange. And unlike ERP alone, which just shares information, EDI, or electronic data interchange, actually takes that information and it translates the data into decisions about inventory, ordering, when we manufacture, how much and what we manufacture, and delivery. Okay, so now we have a much higher level of information sharing, because not only are we now sharing data on sales and orders, and parts of the supply chain can see that information, but now we're starting to coordinate some of the decisions based on that using software that's going to make decisions as to when to place orders, how much to manufacture, when to do deliveries. We can take our information sharing another direction, and we can do some collaborative planning. So in this case, what we're doing is we're working with our supply chain to do our forecasting. So rather than simply sharing data on the amount of sales that have happened, we can actually work together to forecast future demand and determine the design of our product and how our product is going to be replenished. So again, this will reduce the bulb effect and lower costs. What it should do as well is create higher capacity utilization, because all the parts of the supply chain are working from the same set of information. Together, they've created a plan for how much to produce and when, and this should increase customer service. So collaborative planning, forecasting, replenishment, this is called a CPFR. Collaborative planning, forecasting, replenishment. So we're going to share data. We're going to look at the data together. We're going to create a forecast from it and then develop a plan based on that. An example of CPFR is VMI, which is Vendor Managed Inventory. With vendor managed inventory, what happens is that your supplier is responsible for restocking your shelves. So if you think, for example, about at the grocery store, if you ever see the Pepsi employee or the Coke employee, and they're the ones restocking the shelves, they don't actually work for Sobeys or Save-On. They're actually from a distributor for Coke or Pepsi, who's the one who's restocking. So in this case, it's the supplier who keeps an eye on the inventory levels and replaces them as necessary. Another way to share information is through the adoption of new business models and technologies. So what if you want to move into a new market, or you want to create a new type of product? Here you're partnering with other parts of your supply chain to identify new opportunities for the supply chain. So here, not only are we improving the efficiency, but we're looking for new opportunities and looking for ways to customize our product to meet different demands in the market. So an example of this might be you want to move into the Chinese market with your product. So you're going to increase your supply chain to include a Chinese retailer, someone who knows the market and the customers, and who is going to help with the distribution of what you've produced. So often this last one here is to get into an area that you are not currently selling in. So you decide then what's going to be the level of information sharing. Are we just going to share when we've identified issues, or are we actually going to give them other parts of the supply chain access to our databases in terms of number of of orders and what customers are ordering? Are we going to work together on forecasting demand and creating a strategy for the company and what it will produce and when? Are we going to work together and move into new markets? So as you are building your supply chain, you have to ask, are we going to own parts of the supply chain, or are we going to have relationships with other companies? And what level of relationship are we going to have? As you look at that relationship with other companies, you need to look at where is the inventory going to be held. So where is the partially created product going to exist? As you move down the supply chain, if you think about your product, so it's raw materials at the factory, and then it gets turned into a product. So the further down the supply chain you go, the less flexibility we have with the product, right? It's starting to look like the finished product, and so it's designed and built a specific way. The further down the supply chain, the more value it has, right? A finished product has more value than the raw materials. But it also has limited use because it's no longer the parts or the pieces, it's now the finished product. So you have to decide your excess inventory, is it going to be stored as the parts, the raw materials? Is it going to be stored as the finished product? Now, related to that, let's look at the idea of delayed differentiation. Delayed differentiation is where you wait until late in the process to add differentiation. So these are differentiating features to our standard components. So let's suppose that you are a paint store. All right, you sell Benjamin Moore paint. Now, when it comes to buying paint, typically we buy colored paint. So let's suppose you want purple paint. Well, how come there's not purple paint waiting for you at the Benjamin Moore dealer, right? How come purple paint is not already stocked and waiting for you? Well, if we put the purple in the paint at the manufacturing plant, then we've already specified that this product has to be purple. And the problem with that is that we lose the flexibility of use because now that can of paint is only good for people who want purple walls. But if we delay differentiation, that is, we don't turn it purple until the customer wants purple paint, then we have more flexibility in our inventory. And then we can actually sell that paint to someone who maybe wants green paint or blue paint. So by delaying differentiation, waiting until later in the process to add those, then that saves us on flexibility. It allows us to meet more consumers' needs. When we look at how our inventory is held, we also have to think about the issue of risk pooling. This is holding safety stock. So that's the extra just in case. And do you hold it in one central location rather than multiple locations? So where are you keeping your excess inventory? So let's suppose that you are Sears. And why doesn't every Sears keep a stash of Samsung refrigerators and Maytag dishwashers on hand? Well, if they're excess inventory, if they keep it at each location, then each location is going to have a lot of safety stock, right? Each one's going to have excess refrigerators and dishwashers. But if they do risk pooling, if we hold the safety stock in one central location, then if the Sears in Red Deer needs a Samsung refrigerator, it can be quickly sent from the warehouse. But if the Samsung refrigerator is not needed in Red Deer, it can be sent to Edmonton. So here we reduce the cost to our supply chain because we don't have as much obsolescence and storage costs because we are pooling our risk. We're holding the safety stock in one central location, which means that that material then can be used by multiple parts of our supply chain, or in this case, different distribution centers. And then we're less likely to have it just sit in the corner and lose value. So when we look at our inventory, we have to consider, do we want to store our inventory where it's the most valuable, so it's a complete product? Do we want to keep it as the parts or raw materials, so increase flexibility? Can we delay our differentiation so that we can increase the flexibility of use? And can we do risk pooling so that we don't have that increased cost of storage and obsolescence because we're sharing the safety stock among parts of our supply chain?